This is going to be Unit 1, Day 3. And whereas yesterday we talked about the Spanish, today we're going to focus on French and Dutch colonization here in the New World. So starting with the French, what was their purpose for coming here? Well, just like everybody else, the French wanted to make money. The French, though, did things a little bit differently when they came into the New World here. The French, their relationship you're going to see with the natives is going to be very different than the English and even the Dutch. The French treated the natives with a little bit more respect. Now, when I say a little bit more respect, you're going to realize the French still had a ton of issues with the natives that were here, but they did have somewhat of a better relationship with them. The French came into primarily what is now Canada, would be the area that they primarily came into, and really what they did was fur trading. That was their big focus when they were here, was the fur trade. Now, how did the French treat the natives differently? Really, you're going to see the big thing, the big way that they treated the natives differently is they did not use forced conversion to Christianity. Whereas the Spanish used forced conversion to Christianity, the French really didn't engage in that very much. When they sent over their missionaries here, really their big focus was on behavior, how they acted, providing for the Indians when they could, and from there then hoping that the natives would turn over to Christianity. They didn't engage in a lot of large-scale forced conversion to Christianity. This is very important because you're going to see later on in history when we get to talking about like the French and Indian War, that the precedent that had been set decades before and how the French would treat the natives would affect how the natives would act in future wars, which sides they would side with, even going up to the American Revolution, it would have an effect. Another thing you're going to see with the French is that the French develop a relationship with the Iroquois. The Iroquois really do rise as one of the great Native American tribes during this time, largely because of their control of the beaver trade. That gave them a lot of power, and that was a way that they could push out other Native tribes that were in here in North America. It also gave them a lot of power when dealing with the French. So you can see the Iroquois and the French had a pretty decent relationship and traded quite a bit between each other. Again, were the French successful? You could say that they were successful. They did establish themselves there in France and were influential there. Now you're going to see the Dutch. When we think about the Dutch, they came here for one reason, to make money. That's the only reason they came here, was for economic gain. They weren't overly concerned about creating colonies. They did make a colony, most famously New Amsterdam, which would later become New York City. But really, their major focus was on making money here. And you're going to see the Dutch throughout this period of history, their major focus was on commerce, trade, and making money. Even up to the American Revolution, you're going to see when the young United States, which at that time was really just the 13 colonies, when they are struggling financially, one of the countries that we send our ambassadors to is over to the Dutch to try to establish financial relationship with them and get loans of money through them. Future President John Adams, he would be the one that we would send over there to try to negotiate loans with them. So the Dutch, their big focus was on that. You also see the Dutch controlled the African slave trade. Once that grows really big, that the Dutch had control over that as well. Now, when we're evaluating were the Dutch successful, no, they weren't really successful. They did make money, but because of their hands-off approach and focus on really just making money, they weren't able to establish much here. And you're going to see by 1664 that New Amsterdam actually has been turned over to the English, who then turn it into New York City. But yeah, they obviously did not establish a very big presence here in the New World. So that gets us through the three major groups that would be here. You're going to see during this period that the English do try to establish colonies here. Most famously, they try to establish a colony on Roanoke Island, which is right on the Outer Banks, about 5 hours away from us. That colony would fail. They would try, really wouldn't be successful until Jamestown. But the English do attempt and try to do that, but they would not be successful. So that's why our major focus during this time is on the Spanish, the French, and the Dutch, and what colonization looked like for them. So that's all for new content in this unit. Like I said, this is not a very big unit. There's not a lot of information, and that's why there's just not a lot on the AP exam. I will say, just to give you a little bit to think about in the end, is that most Native American troops or Native American tribes did not have a large, extensive written history. So that's why this part of history for us really is very, very small. We know some about the tribes. We know some about how they operated, but really a lot of that has just been lost to history. And unfortunately, that's what happens, especially for them not having things written down. I'm obviously not blaming them. It's just what happens throughout history is that, especially with like nomadic groups and that kind of things, a lot of times their history is lost. When the oral history dies off, that history is lost. So that's why we don't have a lot for the native groups there. We do have information from the colonists that came over, the things that they wrote down about how the natives operated. You'll see a lot of times, I can't remember if I have it in this slide's presentation or not. I'll share pictures from John White. He was one of the early settlers to come over to Roanoke Island by the English, and he actually wrote quite a bit about the native tribes that were here and drew a lot of pictures. And a lot of what we know about the Algonquin people, which are the tribes that were in this area, come from what John White wrote down and the images that he drew of the people and how they operated. So that's why this is really a very short unit, because we don't have a ton of information about those native groups that were here and with that. So tomorrow we'll be jumping into a writer's workshop where I'm going to go through a little bit about what the AP exam looks like and what the writing looks like on the AP exam. So have a great day.